Hi everyone. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about some of the miracle stories that are happening right here in our own city, in our own state, every day. My name is Tony Kausha, and the title of our show is Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. Please note, this show is not about religion, and we're not trying to change anyone's religion, and we're not trying to get you to join any religion. It's just about miracle stories. I don't know of any religion on the planet that doesn't talk about miracles. That's why religions begin, because they have something that's telling them there's really a God. But we're not going to get into that. We're going to just talk about miracles and leave the decisions about all that up to you. So we don't care what religion you are. We just want to talk about miracles. If you are an atheist, I think you'll enjoy the program as well, although I can't guarantee you'll remain an atheist very long after you hear many convincing stories, coincidence kinds of stories about miracles. You can email me your own stories if you wish. We'll try to use all we can on the show. I can't guarantee we will, depending on volume and time, but you're welcome to send your stories on to us, and we will mention them when we can. You can send them to the following email address. But please notice that if we do use your story, we won't mention your name. We'll keep you anonymous. And we suggest that in your story, when you send it to us, don't use your correct name. That way anyone listening will not be able to figure out that it was you that sent the story in. The email address you can send your stories to is very easy to remember. It consists of 2 words and 3 numbers. The first word is Tony, spelled Tony, and the second word is and, spelled AND, and the numbers are 777. So once again, the name is Tony and 777 at AOL.com. Well, let us begin. Our first coincidence miracle today is from someone who tells us they were listening to a Protestant minister on TV giving lectures, and toward the end of the lecture, the minister decided to pray for the viewing audience, people watching on TV, also the large congregation that was watching on site. And the prayer of the minister was that God would please bless everybody listening to his talk that night, and bless them in a special way so that they could be ministers in their own environments, that the Spirit of God would fill each person with talents and abilities so that God could change the world by using all the people who were watching this program this night. And the person sharing the story with us tells us that after the conclusion of that episode on TV, the phone rang, and it was a friend of theirs calling long distance and asked them some spiritual advice about something that they were trying to make decisions about. So this is exactly what we talk about when we talk about coincidence miracles. There's a person watching a television show. The minister asks God to bless everybody in the viewing audience and the audience present with special abilities and talents to evangelize and minister and preach and change the world. And then this one person, at least, who's sharing with us, gets a phone call from a friend who asks for some spiritual advice about a spiritual matter right after the conclusion of the television show. And I should stress that the timing was impeccable because the show had just finished and the phone call came in. It's not like the phone call came in an hour later. It was perfectly timed so that the phone call came in at the conclusion of the episode on television. And it is this perfect timing that helps us call things coincidence miracles, because the timing is impeccable. Our next coincidence miracle is from someone who was having a family meeting about some stressful things that the family had been arguing about. So they knew they were going to be going to a meeting that was going to be stressful, like walking on eggs. They felt fortunate because they were going to go to morning mass first. It was on a Sunday, and they felt that would empower them spiritually to go to mass first. So they were delighted with that. And they relate to us that on the way over, after Mass, on the way over to the family meeting, they got to the last intersection before the meeting while they were driving, and they saw a car license plate there with the letter G, like G for God, and it had three-letter G's, and G is the seventh letter of the alphabet, so 3 G's, remarkably, is 3 sevens, and that's the number indicating God's permission, participation, and power. So they felt strengthened by all of that. And they relate that an important thing that happened was that when they were leaving the church after Mass, they coincidentally bumped into a friend, and they had a brief chat for about 5 minutes. And if they didn't do that, have the chat for 5 minutes, they would not have gotten to this intersection precisely as the other car was arriving. So I'm stressing all this for us because that's how we notice coincidence miracles. If they didn't have the 5-minute delay at the church, they would have gotten to the intersection 5 minutes earlier, and they would not have seen the car. So sometimes when we get these 5-minute delays, it's because God is orchestrating things, and He knows where that car is, that car that's going to meet you at the intersection. He knows how far away that car is. He knows what speed they are driving. He knows what speed you're going to be driving, etc., etc. And it's so amazing. It's so intricate that when you have these things happen at, like this at a stop sign, and you realize, my God, I got tied up for 5 minutes after church with a discussion, but then I walked to my car in a slow pace or a fast pace on that particular day. And you start thinking about, gee, if I walked faster, I would be missing this car. If I walked slower, I would be missing this car. If I didn't talk to that person, you see, so that's why we have to, really investigate and think about when we see a coincidence, think hard and notice all these things that had to happen, especially that other car that's going to meet you at the intersection. They may be driving a 2-hour drive from somewhere long distance, and they're in traffic jams, etc., to get to meet you at that intersection. So when it happens, it's got to be a miracle that all of this happens perfectly timed, especially when you get to an intersection, as has happened to me one day. I got to an intersection, and there were three cars with 3 numbers, 3 holy numbers at this intersection. 3 cars met me as I arrived. I mean, that is just so unbelievable. That's why I'm such a person who believes in coincidences, because I have things like that convince me. And I know God is doing that for me because He knows I'm doing this show, and I wrote 2 books. So for me, God is convincing me beyond any doubt that He's orchestrating 3 different cars from different locations, and 2 of them were from out of state, not from Connecticut. And, it just blows my mind how God gets 3 cars from 3 different states to meet me at an intersection just before one of my meetings. Our next person tells us about a doctor's appointment they had, and they were running late to get there. The traffic was backed up. They left their house a little bit too late, so they were very concerned they were going to be late. They got to the parking garage, the new parking garage on Walnut Street. At the time it was new. And as they drove in and drove up the first ramp, they thought, my God, I'm going to have to park on the 3rd floor, and I'm going to be late. Well, the absolute first car on the first floor pulled out exactly as this person was driving in and driving up. So they got the absolute first parking spot. The person was leaving. Talk about perfect timing and coincidence miracle. And they got to the doctor's office precisely, exactly on time. So I know when this happens to me, I'm very excited, and I can imagine he was excited as well. But again, when these things happen to you, what are the odds that you're going to be late for a doctor's appointment, and when you drive into the garage and you're thinking you have to go up to the 3rd floor to get a parking place because it's a packed garage at that time of the day, the very first car that had already parked there, finished their business in time, to be leaving exactly as you're pulling in and going by them, and it's the first car. So remarkable, but that's what the show's all about. If something like that happens to you and you don't want to think about it as a miracle, that's your choice. I hope if that happens to you that God will bless you and give you enough sightings like this. Like, let's say you had this happen to you 5 times in a 2-month period. If that happened to you 5 times, I think by then you'd be convinced. And that's why I'm so convinced, because these things have been happening to me for 50 years. That's 49 years plus 1. That's why I'm so convinced. I've had so many of these. And if you read my 2 books, you'll read about 200 miracles like that are extremely convincing. And you can go back and listen to all of our shows. We've got about 170 shows already, weekly shows like this. There's tons and tons of coincidence miracles. And if you want to listen to any of the past shows, just Google our webpage. Here's our webpage, WCATradio.com/miracles/. One more time, Google WCATradio.com/miracles/, or Google the title of the book, Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. Our next miracle is something that happened to me recently. I was inspired to think about what I could share here on the radio of some things that would be helpful to our audience, some things that discipline ourselves to stay in touch with God, grow daily, stronger in watching coincidence miracles, etc. So what kind of things could I suggest to the audience that would help all of us, including myself, to draw closer to God and be more confident when we're having discussions with Him? So the first thing would certainly be talk to God all the time, all day long, about everything that comes up. Talk to Him like your best friend. Constantly stay in conversation with Him and listen to the inspirations and the ideas that come back to you. So try to do that as often as possible. It helps to do it at every meal. Every time you sit down to have a meal, it's a good reminder to you to think a little bit and talk to God a little bit mentally as you're eating or just before you're eating. And some people say grace, say a prayer blessing the food. But you're going to eat. You're going to eat at least twice a day, I would think. Maybe some people eat 6 times a day. So if you get into the habit of saying something to God, 5 or 10 words, and then listening to an inspiration every time you eat, that'll guarantee you that you're always going to be talking to God. So I was praying about it, and I spent some time meditating, and I came up with a list. And I got the list in my mind, and as I finished it and got ready to leave the church, I was doing this in a church, I saw a friend of mine leaving the church at the same time, and I got inspired to ask that person, because I see them regularly at church, and I know they're a prayerful person, so I was inspired to ask them if they would be kind enough to tell me what they think the list would look like. And I want to tell you that they came up with the exact same list that I came up with. So I'm going to share it with you, but please remember what I just said. I was inspired to put this list together. Then I was inspired to ask a person coming out of the church, what would they come up with? What would their list look like? And they came out with the same exact list as I'm about to give you. So it's already confirmed 2 people got the inspiration from God. Number 1, always have discussions with God all day long. When you sit down for a meal, talk to Him before you eat the meal. That's number 1. Number 2, worship on the Sabbath. Get to church, get to the synagogue. Number 3, say the rosary. You don't have to be Catholic to say the rosary. Everybody can say the rosary. You can Google it. They tell you how to do it. Divine Mercy Chaplet. You can Google that, how to do the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And the next one is whenever you're with people, try to bring God up. Try to talk about God. A neat way is say, do you have any coincidence miracles that I can share with our radio connection and get coincidence miracles? Because if you talk about God, then God is there with you present. God bless you all. I'll talk to you next week.